Okay, well, it's been a wonderful morning of more heterodox conversation here in Chicago. Again, my name is Michael Regnier. I'm the executive director here at HXA. I'm humbled and frankly intimidated to share the stage with some true luminaries in the higher ed space talking about a critically important topic. And rather than spend half the session reading their resumes to you, I will give the extremely truncated introductions, and then we'll talk about where's the university going. Starting from my right, Nadine Strossen is the John Marshall Harlan II Professor of Law at New York Law School, the immediate past president of the ACLU, and one of the finest advocates, I would say, for free expression around, and a great friend of HXA. Nadine, we're thrilled that you're here with us. Jacob Howland is the provost and the dean of intellectual foundations at the University of Austin, otherwise known as UATX. He's the provost and dean of that program. He's the author of 5 books on Plato, Kierkegaard, and the Talmud. You can read more about him in the introduction. One of our longtime HXA members and contributors, Dr. Amna Khalid, is the associate professor of history at Carleton College. She specializes in modern South Asian history, the history of medicine, and the global history of free expression, and you may know her as a podcast and blogger on banished.substack.com. Cary Nelson is a professor emeritus at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He's also the previous president of the National AAUP, serving from 2006 to 2012. He's the editor and author of 35 books and has written about modern poetry, academic freedom, and his newest book, Hate Speech. And finally, of course, Dr. Stanley Fish is on stage with us. He's visiting professor at the New College of Florida. I hope we get a chance to hear about that a little bit. And one of the more accomplished and original academic thinkers of our age. Stanley, I would call you a famous contrarian, but you probably disagree with me. So I want to ask you all to join me in welcoming our panelists. So I'd like to start with the question that is the title of this panel: where is the university going? And I'll just elaborate a little bit. As you look out at higher education today, what's something that you see? Perhaps a shift, a trend, or just a boiling tension that seems like it's going to not just be around today as a fad or a momentary worry, but is likely to matter for years to come. Amna, maybe we can start with you.
First, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure, and I feel like I'm the one who is extremely humbled. I don't know why I belong on this panel, but I'm delighted to be here. I'll start by saying, this has been a fantastic conference. Thank you, HXA, for putting it together. And some of the things that we've seen in terms of where the university is going require some reflection on what's happened in this past year. So I think the situation in Gaza has been pretty instrumental in changing people's lives, of course, in the Middle East, but also over here. Americans have a true capacity for making the crisis about themselves. So true to that, we've seen it all play out on college campuses where the tensions have kind of taken over what should be the focus of what's going on in the world. But having said that, I think that moment has been incredibly clarifying, and we've seen a shift. This has been part of the conversation for the entire conference, pretty much. We've seen a shift taking place for those who were calling for speech codes in the name of inclusion and diversity, realizing perhaps that free speech is essential for furthering their own cause. I think there's been a shift, a very notable shift, that we have seen the influence that donors have and can exert in very, very unhelpful ways to undermine the academy. I think we've also seen the ways in which faculty have risen to the occasion. I mean, the number of institutions where faculty have critiqued their presidents for not really standing up for the fundamental value of academic freedom has been heartening. As someone who has been watching the decline of faculty co-governance and a systematic undermining of it, it's a little heartening to see it at this moment. So I think the moment is pregnant with possibility in terms of faculty regaining some of that control, and there's a lot of need for self-correction. So, and it has to come from the faculty, so I'll say that out there. So I've been heartened by these trends, these shifts, and I think these are much needed shifts. But I think there is something else that we have spoken less about at this conference, and in the interest of being heterodox, I would like to draw attention to it, which is the biggest threat to academic freedom in the university is coming from legislation. There is plenty that is wrong within the academy, and we need to fix it. But as someone who comes from a country where we've made a political football out of our education system and subsequently ruined it, legislatures have no role in controlling what can and cannot be taught on college campuses. I think the attack on expertise is especially dire, and I am very concerned that we are focusing, as we should be, on problems within the academy, but we're not having a sustained conversation, and we're turning our back towards this rhino that is going to come and rip us all to shreds. So the single value, I would argue, that has made American higher education the envy of the world is the vociferous defense of academic freedom that has been here. Universities periodically, the academy goes through crises, but protecting that freedom is crucial and critical, and it is under dire threat. So in terms of trends, it's an election year. I think we should be talking about what happens to higher education if Trump comes to power, because he's made no bones about what his plans are, which I'm happy to talk about at length after my colleagues have spoken. But I think we also need to recognize that there are people like Christopher Rufo who are pushing a very political agenda to capture the university for a different kind of political purpose, and that is going to fundamentally ruin us. So sorry that I can't be more hopeful, but I think it is imperative that we talk about this.
Thank you, Amna. Stanley, can we go to you next? You said this question had you thinking this week as well.
Yes, but it had me thinking backwards. Back to 1962, when I entered the profession at my first position at the University of California at Berkeley, a very little town with nothing going on, no restaurants, one dress shop which had the same green dress in the window for years. One other feature of my early experience at Berkeley was that if you were identified somehow as someone who worked at the university, you were very well treated by merchants. The day after the free speech events of 1964, that changed. And what you wanted to do after that day is hide your identification with the university so that you might at least get decent treatment from merchants. So where the university was on one day a point of pride for the community and for surrounding communities, the next day it was a point of shame. That was a moment, and it's not a moment from which we've ever recovered, because it brings to the fore a question that underlies your question, which is the question of public relations, which is folded into, of course, the question of support. How do we get support? Because we cannot float our own academy as if we were just, along with Socrates and Plato, sitting under a tree and talking about ideas. Many things have made it difficult to answer that question in a confident way, and here I agree with Amna, but some of them are things over which we had no control. And I remember my days in the early times of the 60s when I was, as a young instructor, sitting in a gym with a set of 3x5 cards registering students for their courses, because that's the way it was done. There were no computerized programs. There were no compliance programs. There was very little security. Admissions offices were very minimal things. When my brother, for reasons that I won't go into, wanted to come to the University of California at Berkeley, I went next door to the dean, to the guy who was in the head of admissions, and I said, "Charlie, my brother wants to come here." He said, "Okay." That was it. Now, obviously, all of these new expenses, plus the bad odor that colleges and universities came to be in after 1964, were accompanied by, I can't say caused by because I don't know the cause and effect relationship, although someone like Christopher Newfield might be able to explain it better than I, but the support for universities, especially public universities from the states, declined. When I came in, the support was 70% and above of operating costs. It's now anywhere from 7% to 2%, although these universities still call themselves state universities. So what can you do in the face of these circumstances? I belong to two worlds. I'm a faculty member in law schools and also now returning after a 20-year absence to a liberal arts setting. And the answers to those questions will differ because law schools have a defined market. They know who their consumers are. They have something called the ABA, the American Bar Association, which sets up all kinds of requirements and credentials and enforces them. Law schools are a professional model, as described by Magali Larson in her great book, The Rise of Professionalism. That is, law schools have control of a service and now are both credentialed by the state and can determine how large a body of providers of the service they promise they will give. This is a luxury. Law school markets aren't going to go away. Doesn't mean that there's nothing problematic about them. There is. Markets for the liberal arts, on the other hand, have always been in trouble and are more and more in trouble because questions like, what are liberal arts for? What good are they? Are they worth it? Questions that have always been asked over dinner parties, but now are being asked and answered in distressing ways by some of the forces that Amna introduced. So my only optimistic note, and I'll end on this, I attended a conference a year ago this week at the University of Toronto. It was a 5-day conference on the poetry and prose of John Milton. Wow. 250 papers, all of which had titles that I recognize from 1968. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great.
Let's bring in the rest of our panel. Nadine, what do you make of where's the university going, and do you want to add in some other themes to our conversation?
Yes, I would, but first I'd like to comment, of course, on Amna and Stanley's comments about the dangers from legislatures and, should I say, from governors and presidents, elected officials and politicians are very serious. And I'm going to say not but, rather, and therefore the self-critique that we have been going through and the internal reforms that Heterodox Academy has been promoting are especially important. So we can react in a positive way to the legitimate criticism that leads to illegitimate efforts of control. I am so much more optimistic today than I was before this conference started. It has been so inspiring to see where is the university going. I take the cue from those who have participated here and who make me so optimistic, not just in terms of theory, although I agree with you, Stanley, poetry, philosophy, liberal arts, very, very important, but in terms of data-based models and analysis. And I've only been able to see a small portion of what's going on because there's too much, right? We can't go to all of the concurrent sessions, but what I have seen, it gives me, especially as somebody who cares deeply about free speech and academic freedom, number one, that there is a great appetite for that. There's a great appetite for all of the Heterodox Academy values and for pursuing them according to the heterodox way. That the people who are making the most noise and getting the most attention from legislatures and from the media are not representative of either faculties or students. Number two, I'm absolutely convinced that we have this proliferation of amazing resources for elevating the discourse on campus, for promoting the open inquiry and constructive dialogue and viewpoint diversity that are our goals and that I think would deflect the political critique that would help to restore public trust. If I can just mention a couple, and it's anecdotal because I haven't been able to go to, I can only be in one place at the same time. Nobody's helped me overcome that limitation yet. But for example, on the most contentious issue that I know has not been substantively addressed on so many campuses, all of the issues after October 7th, there was just a fabulous presentation by Ellie Abishai and by Shira Hoffer, Ellie being with the Mill Institute at University of Austin, and Shira, astoundingly, being an undergraduate at Harvard, who have demonstrated programs for bringing together people with disparate views, people with ignorance, to productively discuss these topics in an illuminating way. And then I also went to, most recently, a demonstration by the Bridge USA program, which is, again, and these are just examples of the kinds of tools that I think are going to push the university closer and closer toward the heterodox model, and therefore shield us from or give us a very strong counter argument to the very dangerous political pressures.
Since we mentioned the University of Austin, let's bring in Jacob. Jacob, how do you see the future?
Well, it's hard to predict the future, as Yogi Berra has pointed out. I definitely think that, especially since October 7th, it's clear that universities, especially elite ones, have been melting down. I think the universities need reform. And I've been thinking a lot about why they've been melting down. So it occurred to me, maybe I should start an organization called Orthodox Academy. And the reason is that, well, let me say we have to rehabilitate the term orthodox. So let's start with the term heterodox. Heterodox is a good Greek word, just like orthodox. Heteros means other or different. And the opposite of other or different is same. But orthodox doesn't mean same. The dox part is doxa, opinion. Orthos means upright, as in rectitude, like orthogonal. And I guess my claim would be that universities need to recover orthodoxy in the noble and correct sense. If you ask somebody, can you be religiously orthodox and intellectually heterodox, the answer is, of course, yes. Someone who's religiously orthodox knows that there is something sacred above him or her. And universities need to remember lost is this unifying conception of truth. So to be orthodox, the notion of orthodoxy has been taken over by political orthodoxy, ideological orthodoxy. That's the problem in universities today. They're sinking in a sea of illiberalism. And if it's not truth that's guiding you, then what is? If there's not a love of truth, if a university is not a community united by a shared love of truth, then it's not even worthy of the name university. It's not what in Latin we would call an universitas, a whole. And then all it becomes is power, is argumentation for the sake of power. Which view dominates? So universities must recover orthodoxy. They must, so to speak, understand that the truth, like the sun, shines on all of us. It's above us. We have to get out of the cave. But now universities have sealed the cave. They have become politicized. And political activism is not what universities are fundamentally about. Thank you. So I'll conclude with this. If you ask me where the university is going, I am very heartened by this opportunity, and I think this has been an outstanding conference. And I think that they will go in one of two directions. If they continue to be dominated by politics, they will become irrelevant, and they will continue to implode. I think that the tide's changing, and I think that we have an opportunity to open up the top and reorient people to being part of a community of teaching and learning for which there is so much appetite, and to restore universities to what they once were and can be again.
Thank you. Cary, finish us out on this first round of this very easy and simple topic. Where's the university going by your estimation?
I have nothing to say after the other people. Well, that wasn't true.
That never true of you.
So let me both agree and disagree. I mean, Jacob thinks that the university needs reform, and I absolutely think it does. Stanley and Amna are inclined to think that the dangers are primarily from the outside. If I were living in Florida, I think I might have to take that position as well. And I think it's possible that the results of the next presidential election could generate some substantial threats to academic freedom. I think we can't be certain, but there's a risk that a fully controlled Congress and presidency, if all three branches are simultaneously held by one party, then I'm worried, whichever party it is. That might change. But I think at present, the main threats to the university are internal. And the public threat will be greater if they figure out who and what we are. That ain't gonna help. It's not gonna, public confidence will drop substantially if they know more about what the university is in many ways actually devoted to. Not comprehensively, because a university is many things. A university includes the people here, many of whom have given really splendid, thoughtful, challenging presentations. I've been to several days of presentations, scribbled notes, learned things. I'm going to be in touch with people asking me to send their presentations so that I can take more notes. I mean, the university includes all of us, so I think it's very difficult, despite the temptation, to speak of the university as a consistent single entity. Large institutions are very diverse collections of practices. The teaching practices in one department may bear little relationship to the teaching practices in another department. The standards for truth in a given discipline may bear no relationship at all to the standards for truth in yet another discipline. So we are this congeries of many different things. However, there are times when the university speaks with one voice, and it can be a destructive voice. If the university operates under a universal DEI warrant, my own campus is considering making DEI statements a requirement for tenure and a requirement for job applications. And I think once it becomes a requirement, it's a form of tyranny that obliterates academic freedom. I spent a lot of my career studying African American poets and promoting Langston Hughes, but I did it because I loved them, not because I was following some tyrannical DEI warrant. So the hopeful sign, I think, for universities as a whole is that there's some blowback to that kind of enforcement of simultaneous uniform political views throughout every campus operation. There are moments like that when the university is the university, a single thing in quotes, where difference is eliminated. But I think if there's one thing that I think I heard not one word of at the conference, and maybe it was at a session that I missed, but at least at the ones I attended and the plenaries, I didn't hear anyone say anything about the state of academic disciplines. And that, I think, is our greatest danger, because academic disciplines, many of them, some of them, a few of them, whatever, depending upon your perspective, some are not devoted to the search for the truth. They don't share that basic principle. They are largely devoted to the imposition of unified political belief. They make unified political belief the basis of their student recruitment. They make it the basis of their faculty recruitment. They make it the basis of tenure decisions, and so forth. They become something like indoctrination machines. If the public ever actually figures out that that's what some of our departments are devoted to, and they're devoted to it because that's the disciplinary perspective. It starts most dramatically with professional associations, with academic disciplines that opt for political uniformity and attempt to impose political uniformity. And then it becomes much easier for the department to adopt political uniformity. The National Disciplinary Association says this is what's right, this is where the truth is, and the department absorbs it, passes resolutions, and begins making personnel decisions and curricular decisions based on that political uniformity. Well, that will not play well in the public. They aren't going to like that. And then they're going to feel that they need, in fact, to do something, to intervene. So I think that's one way in which reform presents a huge challenge. And it requires the faculty acting collectively. It requires faculty senates taking a hard look at the state of academic disciplines and thinking about them. I was AEUP president for 6 years, but I was actually in the elected leadership for 23 years. And through much of that time, and there's a raft of AEUP documents that reinforce this point of view, I felt disciplines were what you could rely on. And I also felt that disciplines would reform themselves, that they would challenge themselves, and they would heal from their ruptures, and they would heal from their temporary madness and become admirable and diverse intellectual enterprises again. And I saw some of that happen to a limited degree, and that restored my faith. There are AEUP leaders that say you can judge the quality of a department by how completely it adheres to the truths that the discipline believes in. If the department mirrors the discipline, then you know that the department is a reliable intellectual structure. Well, I got to tell you, that ain't going to help, because mirroring the discipline is, in a significant number of cases, the single worst thing a department can do. And we have to face that. And that means that the hard sciences need to take a real look and study the character of disciplines outside their ordinary sphere. I know, because I talk to a lot of scientists and have for 50 years, I know that many scientists at my institution and others regard a certain number of academic disciplines as jokes. They don't think they're serious intellectual enterprises. They think they're some form of buffoonery, but they tolerate it. They tolerate it because they have a distorted notion of academic freedom, which means that we don't take any mutual responsibility for evaluating and monitoring one another. And I think we have to begin to ask ourselves, if the universities exist for the search for the truth, if that's their primary goal, then are there enterprises on campus which in fact reject that goal? And what can we do about it? Those are going to be very hard decisions to undertake, but I don't think we can reform ourselves unless we think about the ways in which we've diverged from the fundamental purpose of the university.
Stanley?
Excuse me. I want to pick up on two things Cary just excuse me. He knows better than I do that he's repeating a warning that was first issued in the 1915 AAUP declaration, statement rather, on academic freedom and tenure. And that is, and it was put this way, that a respectable enterprise, a discipline, must police its own boundaries. Because if it does not, there will always be outside constituencies which want to come in and not only do the policing, but transform the institutions in their own image. I also want to underline or testify to my agreement with one of Cary's statements about the different senses of or understandings of truth in different disciplines. My only quarrel with what Jacob said, and he may not have meant this, is that he talked about the university as being about approaching the truth. When I hear something like that, I remember the first line of Bacon's essays. "What is truth?" asked jesting Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. I think we should not utter large abstractions like truth and see and believe that we have said something, except waved a flag or congratulated ourselves. The truths that we are interested in are disciplinary. And for the disciplinary truths to be worth pursuing, they must operate in the very spirit that Cary was urging. But please, drop the moral vocabulary that so many in this room, as far as I can tell, are addicted to. We are not moral agents. We are not engaged in a noble enterprise. We have a job, and we should do that job and do it responsibly and not surrender in the ways that Cary was correctly lamenting.
I want to ask a question right on that point, but Jacob, I feel like a presidential moderator. Since your name was mentioned, sir, would you like to reply?
No, I mean, I certainly think you have a point, and I think I would put it together with Cary's point, which is that the disciplines themselves are in trouble. But I do think that universities actually do have a political function, even though small p politics should not be in the classroom. And that political function, I mean, the American university has served this country very well over the years by preparing leaders, by preparing informed citizens, by stimulating the economy, by being centers of technological innovation, and so forth. So maybe there's a slight difference here. I do actually see education as a noble enterprise because it liberates the souls of individuals. And
there you go again.
Yep. There you go. So I'll stop.
Let's talk about how this overlaps with democracy, as you were just saying, Jacob. So as we look ahead to a back-to-school time that is potentially fraught on campus, we will have seen campuses become stages for protest and organizing. In many cases coordinated and amplified by social media, overlapping with the larger national and global conversations, with sometimes outside activists of all angles coming and getting involved. And as Nadine mentioned, on top of that, it's an election year, or as Amna mentioned, rather. So here's my question, because we've talked a lot about some of the dangers, but at HXA we do like to try to steel man our critics. And I can imagine a critic coming to our conference and saying, you know, it seems like there's a lot of talk about freedom and expression and democracy, but when we actually see a whole lot of at least expression, if not very academic sometimes, everybody gets nervous. And now there's a lot of talk about neutrality, and it seems like this is pulling back. So let me ask the opposite. If students and faculty came back to campus in the fall and really got involved in democracy in the best possible way on campus, and we would say, you know what, this is what academia and democracy and maybe being a 19-year-old kind of learning about the political world for the first time, if we said that's what that looks like, what would we see on campus? And maybe, Nadine, I can start with you.
Well, Michael, you asked what is the best possible way to engage in these conversations and debates and deliberations and discussions. And of course, the best possible way is the HXA way, right? In all seriousness, the protests are an important form of self-expression, which is one of the purposes of free speech, but also an important form of communicating with elected officials, with campus officials, with other audiences. So I am not going to disparage the important role that peaceful, non-disruptive protest that does not intimidate or harass or otherwise chill the free expression and equal educational opportunities of other members of the campus community. But within those commonsensical First Amendment boundaries, protest is fine as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough, because in some ways what we've seen, warring groups of demonstrators shouting conclusory slogans at each other, is the antithesis of the kind of dialogue and discourse that would be considered. Thank you. So we want to stimulate that as well. And I hearken back, okay, boomer, I hearken back to my old school days in the late 60s and early 70s, where I did get a great deal of satisfaction out of protest activities, but even more so, I remember and am grateful for what we then called teach-ins, using the enormous interest that has been generated in what for many students were fairly arcane topics, and unfortunately for many of them, there still is a great deal of ignorance. And one of the things I learned from that great presentation I mentioned about the October 7th, post-October 7th situation is many students realize that they are ignorant, and when given an opportunity to say so anonymously, request opportunities to gain information. So I think that we should use this as the proverbial teachable moment and address it with the same degree of seriousness and focus and pervasiveness that have been invested into DEI and sexual harassment training. It should start with the recruitment, and when I say it, I'm talking about several clusters of issues. One is free speech and academic freedom and institutional neutrality principles. I think everybody, for reasons Amna referred to, is much more invested in these, because everybody, including those on the left who have been denying the significance of cancel culture, for lack of a better word, have now acknowledged that it can have an adverse impact on their views as well. So we should take advantage, even maybe hypocritical and maybe temporary, but let us use it and build upon it. And so we should start with recruitment materials. Oh, I'm so sorry. So teaching those principles, also teaching the substantive issues, which are not only related to the politics and the history of the Middle East, but there's such a range of substantive issues, including when students are asking for divestment. I mean, I've used those debates as an opportunity to realize how ignorant I myself am about university endowments and financial principles. I mean, this is also a really, and principles of university governance. It's also an opportunity for skills training on negotiation and mediation. So looking at this very, very rich cluster of topics that can be explored in means that go way beyond protest activities, we should start from, as I say, from recruitment materials, from common reads that are assigned during the summer, orientation programs, convocation programs, seminars that take place throughout the semester. And I think going back to my opening comments, I'm more convinced than ever as a result of this fantastic conference that we have not only the hunger on the part of students and faculty members to go in these directions, but we also have phenomenal resources to make it exciting and enjoyable and successful.
Thank you. Cary?
Yeah, I largely agree with Nadine, and I think probably all of us are willing to say that pitched battles with the police on campus are not the best possible incarnation of political analysis in higher education. So let's agree with that as a start. I'm not, however, inclined to valorize the demonstrations as wondrous examples of democratic free expression in action. They're massively ignorant. That's their most defining characteristic. They are accurate that terrible things are happening in Gaza and in the Middle East. That's a fact that's on the TV in front of our eyes all of the time. But the university is not a significant player in Middle East politics or in Middle East economics.
Right.
Most universities divest in index funds or the equivalent of index funds. They don't have major investments in Israel. There's nothing much for universities to divest from. It's a hollow, stupid demand. And therefore, pursuing it is not an example of informed self-expression. It's an example of moronic adherence to a slogan. That doesn't actually advance our interests at all. The university is an educational function. That's what Nadine was saying. And if we actually care about public opinion, let's do more public outreach from both a pro-Israeli and a pro-Palestinian perspective and from other political perspectives. Let's use the university as an educational leverage to try to educate the American public about the facts, the history, and the issues. Because they aren't shining examples of supreme knowledge either. We need education. Let's reach out more broadly and use the university as an ally and an instrument, not as an enemy. To conceive the university as an enemy is a false representation and a complete mirage that it doesn't accurately reflect the reality. The only investments in Israel from universities that really matter, the only direct investments that matter, are investments in cooperative programs, cooperative research projects between faculty members here and there, and sometimes institutionalized at both ends of the oceans. And those represent academic freedom. A faculty member who wants to initiate a research project in Israel, that is an absolutely fundamental principle of academic freedom. To ask that such relationships be brought to an end is to destroy the foundations of academic freedom. If a student wants to study in Israel or any country in the world, even when those decisions are unwise, you can study in places where it ain't safe to do so, and you can plead with the student not to do it. But it's still student academic freedom to make that kind of decision. To ask for the cessation of those formal relationships with other countries, Israel or any other country, is once again to violate academic freedom. And that has to be condemned when students or faculty advocate that kind of change. So when we return in the fall, we don't know what we're going to face. And a significant part of it will depend upon what happens in Gaza. Will the war be over by then? I don't know. I'm praying, because I thought it should be over in a month or two. I thought that was as much as the world would tolerate, and that seems increasingly true. But if the war is ongoing, if there are still people dying, then I think we may see more campus protests, and that's going to be hard to deal with. And one of the reasons it's hard to deal with is that we saw an increased level of anti-Semitism in the encampments. So we saw, in some cases, not just anti-Zionism cross a line into anti-Semitism, we saw the two things merge. That is, we saw them become the same thing.
Right.
And I think it's going to be very difficult to extricate them going forward. So I think that part of what we face going forward in the future is a significant increased level of what is anti-Semitism and not disguisable as anything else. And I gotta say, I do not think, by and large, DEI programs are going to be able to handle that. Unfortunately, I do know the DEI program at my own institution, and the head of it, I'm sure, would be quite difficult. I mean, quite ready to begin a statement on anti-Semitism by saying something like, you know, it just isn't true that Jews have horns and tails. I've found this out. I'm glad to tell you. That's about the limit of where he's capable of going. I don't think that's a good national policy. So we need a much deeper educational endeavor to train our students about what anti-Semitism is. We need to do a better job of training them about racism, Islamophobia. All of those things need to be a much more serious part of our education. Not necessarily imposed, but options that people can take. And those options don't exist on many campuses. There aren't good courses on anti-Semitism that students can enroll in even if they're interested in the subject. So I think we're going to be facing more pressures in that direction in the fall, and if the war in Gaza is ongoing, those pressures are going to produce more disruptions of campus life. We don't know, but the risk is there, and I think we have to prepare for it in the best way that we can, which is by deepening our educational resources.
Mm-hmm. So there seems to, oh, Stanley, go ahead, please.
On the previous occasions where Cary and I have met and debated, we've been on opposite sides. But tonight, or this afternoon rather, we're on the same side, and I want to echo everything he said. But I also want to say that in relation to the question that you posed, I don't believe that the university should think of itself as being involved in democracy at all. We are not in the democracy business. We are not in the free speech business. We are in the education business. I take my cue, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, from something said by the provost of the University of Wisconsin at Madison in 2002 when there was a debate that finally led to the Iraq War. Students came to demand that the university take a position on this issue. And the provost stepped outside of his office and spoke to the surrounding students and uttered a single sentence: the University of Wisconsin does not have a foreign policy. That is absolutely brilliant. The fact that this university, that our universities, colleges and universities, are ensconced in a political democratic system is, of course, nice for us, but it's not a fact that's necessary to the functioning or concept of a university. I remind you all of a text that many of you will know, Immanuel Kant's short piece, What is Enlightenment? In which he says, among other things, that when he, as a scholar, is speaking to scholars, there's a certain kind of freedom allowed, because that freedom is both defined and bounded by academic norms, and that such a freedom can exist independently of the kind of political state in which the university system seems to find itself. I think that we should again, and I'm repeating what I said earlier, turn to a professionalist or professionalism perspective on these matters. We have no responsibility and indeed no competence whatsoever to intervene in the world affairs. We do have competences that are defined by our training, by our contracts, and by the fact that we are salaried employees. And that's it.
No.
Yes. Anything else is
Stanley,
hubris.
I must disagree, because it is my job on this panel. You're telling me to do my job. I'm going to do my job of disagreement. Right? And the thing is, I agree with you on so many things. So let me begin on what I agree with. I think this truth-seeking mission needs to be updated, and I've written about this. It's not that I have an aversion for truth, but rather precisely what you're saying. What constitutes truth in different disciplines is different things, and I think we should think about it, and we would have more friends. I've written about how I think places like HXA and AFA and FIRE could actually bring more people in the fold if we started talking about the mission of higher education as critical inquiry. It's far more inclusive and truly representative of what is happening within the academy, but I won't derail the conversation with that. Now I'll come to my point of disagreement with you. My point of disagreement with you is universities have everything to do with democracy, not because they themselves are political actors, but they need to create the fundamental conditions that equip our students to be good citizens. If you look at the mission statements of institutions across the country, they talk about citizenship. So I agree, institutional neutrality, not taking a political position, is vital and essential for creating those conditions. But we have a responsibility, and I think when students are protesting, like Nadine said, within time, place, manner restrictions, that is part of practicing what something is, what one of your rights is as a citizen. And I think that should be fundamentally allowed. And to think that the same speech laws govern the classroom as the Quad is wrong. Academic freedom comes with academic responsibility in the classroom. Anything that you say has to be evidence-based, it has to be contextualized according to your discipline, and you cannot protest and you cannot derail the conversation. However, when you're on the campus green and you are protesting, that is where I think, yes, you have every right to have free speech, has a great role to play over there. So I think we need to understand that at the university, we have both academic freedom and freedom of expression that need to go hand in hand because they're serving different purposes. Education is our fundamental mission, but training citizens is too. And so, to me, these things are not incompatible. In fact, they're fundamentally compatible when done right.
Thank you, Amna.
Well, you said the thing that draws applause, which is nice. But look, insofar as what can point to benefits for democracy that flow from the fact of universities, I won't disagree with you. My question is, should we in our activities as academics do what we do because of those benefits that flow from us to democracy? With what intention and in what spirit do we either teach our classes or engage in our research? It's not to make the democratic society better and more democratic. It's not to make the world safer for whatever. It's to try to figure out some problem that your discipline has set you. So again, I want to make a distinction between how the praise one might give to universities for conferring certain benefits on the society and the reasons people have for engaging in that work. The moment that you decide that you're engaging in the work that you do because you're going to make your state better or the country better or the world better, you have, in fact, betrayed the academic discipline.
Stanley, if I may.
Nadine.
If I may, I see a harmony between what you and Amna are advocating.
The best move of all.
The motivation may well be to instill in your students, and I'll use my own example, my own discipline, critical inquiry specifically about legal issues. Yeah. I don't see how you can understand constitutional law, or for that matter, just about any other subject without engaging in critical inquiry. But there is a larger spillover effect that I certainly hope goes well beyond the particular discipline in which you happen to be instilling and practicing and cultivating those habits of mind. And the incidental beneficiary, above all else in our democratic republic, is the skills and habits of mind that are essential for active, informed engagement as members of the community, as members of the larger community. I think of the United States Supreme Court in one of its early celebrated cases about academic freedom And I'm a secular person, so I sort of object to the language, but it was high praise from the Supreme Court. They said that teachers and professors are the high priests of democracy.
That was dicta, not law, as you well know. That was just a remark in passing.
Well, Stanley, I'm talking about it. I agree with a lot of things that the Supreme Court says in dissent. I'm not endorsing it because it did or did not have a majority vote. I am endorsing it because I think that is a consistent, correct approach of university professors who have a commitment not only to their discipline, narrowly focused, but also to the benefits to our larger community and our larger political system that will flow from that teaching.
I think I want to clarify something. I think I'm very much in agreement with you that advocacy shouldn't inform how we engage in our disciplinary enterprises and inquiry. 100%, right? That's where we've gone wrong in certain areas. But I think public good is at the heart of why we have public education. And I think that public good is connected to democracy. We can't lose sight of that. It is at the heart of what we do. So I'm very much in agreement with what Nadine is saying.
I used to teach medieval metrics. What kind of public good is that?
Much.
Nothing. If all of the teaching about medieval metrics were to disappear from the earth tomorrow, and I would say indeed, if all the teaching about John Milton were to disappear from the earth tomorrow, little would be changed and not much would have been lost.
Okay.
I would disagree again. I would disagree. The entire liberal arts principle is about, it's not an instrumentalist approach to education, which I believe you're in agreement with me about,
That's
right?
right.
And so we cannot evaluate what is lost and gained in neoliberal terms in terms of thinking how many jobs. I mean, that's exactly the problem with the kinds of proposals that are coming from the right. If we go according to how they're suggesting they want to reform things, you can say goodbye to the humanities. And in great part, I think we're in the place where we are in our country, in the world, in fact, is because of a decline in the humanities. I am willing to make that causal connection. Because if you don't teach people about the human condition and what it means to be a human, then you lose sight of it and you start dehumanizing. The fundamental benefit, I think we lose a lot if we didn't have your contribution, Stanley. We make thinkers.
So allow me to say, let's zoom out. Let's zoom out a little bit, and here's why. Industries, organizations, institutions come and go over time. The university is extraordinary in how it has lasted since the medieval period. But change is sometimes the only constant, and there's more than one way to solve all the sort of jobs to be done that a university does. I heard some people try to list those, and they just went on and on. Everything from, you know, a research institution to the pedagogical role to sports entertainment and hospitals and on and on and on, sometimes even kind of like a hedge fund. If we fast forward beyond this fall to the future decades that we can try our best to anticipate, we might see some new forms, we might see some new variations. We've already seen colleges close at a relatively rapid rate. We've also seen some new openings and approaches. I want to sort of imagine a little bit past just this upcoming year, what could we possibly see? And since you haven't gotten a word in a minute, Jacob, let me start with you. You're involved in a new institution. Can you tell us how you see the significance of that right now?
Yeah, look, there's a tremendous appetite for reform. And there's really two paths forward. Either we can try to reform existing institutions or we can try to build new ones. I support both of those things. I think that reform is needed because, like almost all of our institutions, universities have somehow lost the thread and lost the way. Well, let me say this. The appetite has been expressed by donors who are appalled at what they've seen, especially since October 7th, by parents who are similarly upset, and they have fond memories of their own educations, sort of before the ideological invasion of academic institutions. They're worried about where their children can go. They're also upset, as are their children who are applying to college, that, for example, if you are an Asian female or a white male, your chances of getting in to the institution that you really want to go to are increasingly diminished. And I've heard this story a dozen times now. Administrators, faculty, they're upset. Many of them, entered these professions because they wanted to pursue their discipline, and because the disciplines have been warped. And what I've realized is that, people have been talking to us at the University of Austin and asking questions like, well, are you going to start a law school? Are you going to start a medical school? Are you going to start a business school? Are you going to start a new university press? Are you going to have new journals? And the reason they ask this is because we need reforms in all of these areas, all of them. And so let me maybe reflect on this question of, building a new institution. I don't know which is harder, frankly. I think they're both very hard, to reform an institution and to build a new one. I can tell you some of the things we've learned. There's a huge degree of regulatory capture. So, for example, as a new institution, we got authorized by the state of Texas. That was a mess. There are a bunch of catch-22s. You might be surprised to hear this about Texas, but it was very, very difficult. We cannot be accredited, and the state of Texas, like most or maybe all states, require universities to be accredited nationally. We can't be accredited until we graduate our first undergraduate class. Until then, we cannot accept Pell Grants. Parents cannot spend 529 savings programs. We cannot go to college fairs. Our students will graduate and they will have no assurance that they can go to law school or medical school, because guess what? In graduate school, you need to graduate from an accredited institution. These are huge barriers. But again, what we found is that, there's just this tremendous longing for education, and especially on the part of students. I've been overwhelmed by our applications, and by the way, the provost and the deans, we are the applications committee, including the director of admissions. So I've seen a great number of them, and we bring these students to campus. And what most impresses me is the joy they experience in taking our seminars. We put them in groups of 15, 16 kids, and we're reading, science fiction classics or Dostoevsky or Hamlet or what have you. And they're thrilled. They're thrilled because, universities today, they're not joyful places. We have managed, and not only in universities in K through 12, to knock the stuffings out of the kids, the part of their souls that wants to learn and enjoys this. And many of our applicants have taken courses at universities. And they have found that they did not get from these schools what they wanted. And so, it's time for a change. And I think the other thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is that what we've also discovered is there's an emerging ecosystem, okay? And it starts in K through 12, right, with classical academies, Christian academies, homeschooling, and so forth. And that's great. And there's sort of a lot more choice that students can have. Now, universities, there isn't that much choice because there's a lot of hostility to new entrants. But there are universities that are thinking about these things in the same way we are. And people ask me, do you think Ralston College is your rival and so forth? No, I want 1,000 new institutions. We need to be able to develop a kind of alternative parallel universe where genuine teaching and learning can occur. And I'm very hopeful that this is going to happen. And again, I think Heterodox Academy is extremely important. And I think my Orthodox Academy will also be highly significant in this context. I'm just kidding, please.
If I could weigh in, because I've had the great honor of being on the advisory board for University of Austin and teaching in some of the summer programs. And the positive energy and enthusiasm on the students I've taught have all been college students who have been enrolled at the best and most prestigious and competitive universities, not only all over the United States, but all over the world. And on the one hand, what they say is so positive. On the other hand, it's rather dispiriting. They will say, this is the first time in my college career that I'm able to express myself openly. And that is not just anecdotal, because of all the sobering conclusions in the very sobering most recent report that was put out by Fire and College Pulse survey, very detailed analysis of 254 campuses came out in October. To me, probably the single most sobering was the conclusion that students, after having been enrolled in college, feel less comfortable having a free and candid conversation about the sensitive, important topics ranging from abortion to immigration to police reform. So unfortunately, existing universities have to learn from University of Austin of how to restore the joy, which is connected to the free speech in education.
Well, I've been so engrossed here that my watch died. I didn't even notice. So what I want to say is, what is the unsaid? I'd like to ask each of our panelists if you have a thought about where the university is going that you'd like to share with our audience today. Let's do, respectfully, a little bit of a lightning round as we leave. There are no requirements about optimism or pessimism. There's not even a requirement about heterodoxy or orthodoxy, but I'd love to hear your take. And Stanley, we'll start with you.
Okay, when I heard John Tomasi and Jonathan Haidt yesterday talking about their optimism at this moment and attributing it to perhaps the return of some salutary reflections on education, I shared their delight that the tide seemed to be turning, but it was turning not because of any introduction of ideas, but because university faculties and administrators have been scared. It's fear that's driving it. They were scared first by what happened on December 5th, when 3 ill-advised presidents totally failed to see the difference between a philosophy seminar and a House congressional hearing. And then, of course, the pictures over and over again on the air, on all of the TV media outlets of what was happening at Columbia University and other places. When people see their colleagues or their counterparts at other universities losing their jobs, they get scared. When they see donors saying, I'm not going to give you another penny, they get scared. So I'm optimistic, largely because of the power of fear, not because of the power of ideas.
Cary?
Yeah, well, I began by raising the question of whether the university's internal problems were really more determinative of our risks. And I'd like to address, I guess, something which has been so central to my professional life for so many decades, which is academic freedom and what are the present risks to academic freedom. And I listed a major one, which is disciplinary imposition of unitary political beliefs. But I'm afraid that there are others, and they have to do in part with the inability of different elements of the academy to police itself or regulate itself properly. I don't think that the search for the truth is always the search for the truth with a capital T, but I think we are all engaged with, I certainly am, with whether, when I question whether the next sentence that's about to come out of my mouth or go down onto my computer is true or not. That kind of intricate, step-by-step interrogation of the validity of your inclinations, your emotions, your hypotheses, that kind of search for the truth is integral to the academic activity at every possible level. One of the things that search for the truth requires is contestation and debate. There's an emerging trend in the academy which really worries me, and that is based on the notion that if you publish something and someone criticizes it, that's an imposition on your academic freedom. That questions your academic freedom. Well, that's absolute nonsense, because academic freedom is there as a social good. It requires the testing of hypotheses by others. It requires debate, and it requires aggressive debate. So that trend, which I think is going to begin to play a role in tenure decisions, is very, very damaging. And I guess there's one other development that I'm particularly concerned about that's worth mention, because it hasn't come up yet, and that is the status of social media in academic freedom and in academic personnel decisions. In 2015, my long organization, the AAUP, made a fatal decision that everything that you do on social media should be not just covered by academic freedom in the sense that you have the right to say it, but that it should be absolved from any professional judgment. In other words, your social media activity is not part of your professional dossier. And so that is now translated into directions to faculty search committees, and which are sometimes told you can consider the person's publications and teaching, but you can't consider what they said on social media. There was a strain in the AAUP for many decades that made a distinction between social media activity, which is clearly related to your areas of teaching, research, and professional activity, and social media activity, which is as demented and deranged and ill-advised as what most other Americans do on social media, and that faculty members were free to be, as privileged to be fools like anyone else in the country wants to be on social media. But they took the position that was different from, if you're a geologist and you say on the social media that the Earth is flat, you've got a problem in professional credibility. If you're a European historian and you say that the Holocaust didn't happen, this is a problem, even if you never say it in the classroom and you never say it on your publications. But what if there's a relationship between the two, which is dynamic and mutually informing? So the position, I think, given the prevalence of social media and the tremendous impact of it, I mean, some things that you do on social media will have more impact than anything you ever write or publish. We all know that, right? You get 10 readers for your academic essay on a good year, and on social media you can get hundreds of thousands. So faculty can have huge impact there, and that impact is often in their areas of expertise. So the AAUP's official position, I'm sorry to say, I think is incredibly ill-informed and actually very damaging to academic freedom. Once again, when the public finds out that we believe that Joe Smith on Facebook has to be kept entirely separate from Joe Smith on campus, even though they look the same and they have the same social security number and the same home address, we have to think of them as diametrically opposing individuals or entirely separate individuals. I think that's a real emerging crisis in academia, and we need to back off from that misuse of the concept of academic freedom.
Amna?
I think I agree with what a lot of what's been said, and I think the ways in which people hide behind academic freedom sometimes is not right, and that's not what it's there for. But I think at this moment, let me first start by saying I have been deeply concerned about threats from inside the academy and have been writing and critiquing it soon after I came to the US and started observing these trends. So it's not that I don't see them. I think it's incredibly important that we're critical of them. It is imperative. But I don't think we can have a real conversation about the future of the university without looking at the threats from outside. And these aren't one-off threats. These are concerted threats that are coming from legislatures. If you listen to people in Florida and go and speak to faculty in Florida, it is devastating what it is doing to the teaching in the classroom. I would love to see Heterodox Academy take a position on this because it concerns the fundamental mission of education. We must fight off threats from inside the academy and stand firm against those from outside the academy. And the other thing I would say is, as we think about the university and its future, we need to really, really address the problem of adjunctivitis. That is curtailing the ability of faculty to teach with integrity, because these faculty do not have full academic freedom. So yes, reform from inside, but also a very, very strong stance on protecting the autonomy of higher education. We have much work to do on the inside, but it's all going to go awry if we open ourselves up to influence from the outside.
Jacob?
So much of our conversation has focused on this relationship between the university as an institution and the country, the community, the political community. The concerns that Cary has been articulating, I think, are relevant to addressing some of the issues that Stanley brought up. I admire Stanley's purity in the sense that, you know, we're here to solve these problems and so forth. And although I have to agree with Amna that it would be quite a shame if scholarship on John Milton disappeared, okay? And that's not because I love John Milton, which I do. But let me say that it's very important for us to remember that universities are supported by the American taxpayer, and not just state universities. You know, private universities are tax exempt. And this relationship between the academy and the community it goes back thousands of years. You can read Aristophanes' Clouds, where you've got this strange, rusticated, urbanized Athenian, you know, what marries above him, and like, what's this like, people don't seem to understand, like, what are these weirdos doing? Like, why are they jumping? Why are they figuring out how many feet a flea can jump and things like that? These are arcane, strange questions. What motivates these intellectuals? So, you know, and of course that play ended badly, right? With the thinketeria, the thinkery being burned down. We have to negotiate these tensions. So I do believe that the fact that the American taxpayer supports public institutions, public and private institutions, is relevant here. We can't simply say to them, and this is why Cary's right, we're going to be held to account. We can't simply say to them, you know, oh great, so you can do whatever you want. I mean, why should, you know, wouldn't it then be compatible? Couldn't we then say, oh, well, you know, if you send your kid to a university, beware, because the person might come out and have absolutely no capability. They might actually be little tyrants, like Pheidippides in the clouds, you know, and actually be, you know, hoping to destroy the state or something like this. So we are accountable to the public, and we do have to think about these things. So I'll stop there.
Well, Michael, you asked for a lightning round, and thanks to the eloquence of my co-panelists, I can be and will be brief. Stanley, you and I have been debating each other for 33 years. And I'm going to end by disagreeing with the usual respect from your emphasis on fear, or at least complimenting your emphasis on fear as a motivating factor by instead stressing courage, the kind of courage that was embodied so inspiringly in the winners of the awards that were presented at the opening night of our conference. I admire each of those individuals and the countless others who are doing similar work infinitely, and you have been so inspiring. And one of the awardees referred so eloquently to untapped reservoirs of courage. Let us tap into those reservoirs, and the university will continue to go in a positive direction. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, great minds don't always think alike. I really appreciate this conversation today. And Nicole, do we have time for Q&A? Go ahead. We don't, in fact, so we're going to turn it over to Dr. Tomasi. He'll come up here, and let's thank our panelists one more time. Thank you so much.
I wasn't planning on standing in front of the panel to say goodbye to you, but I will anyway. So I opened, as you'll recall, I opened this conference 2 nights ago by thanking you all for coming, and also, I admit, asking you for money. But I just want to return. I want to return to the thank you. And you know, one of the questions that was raised in this panel is, what am I thanking you for? What is it that you're doing? Is it something noble? Is it something less noble? I think what you're doing, and the reason why I'm sincerely thanking you for coming and for doing the things you do, I think that what you do is something deeply noble. Maybe it's the towering truth that we're searching for. Maybe it's not, Stanley, as you put it out. I can hear that. I think there's a quieter, a more intimate, a more personal element of nobility in what each of us does. At the end of the day, when we think about reforming our universities, what we're trying to do, really, is a simple thing of giving people the ability to think for themselves. We're trying to affect what's available within the minds of individual people, and especially of young people, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, to exercise that most basic freedom of all, freedom of the mind. So I thank you for coming. It's because we're here to reform our universities, and there's bravery in that, and I admire each and every one of you for doing that. We do it all day long at HXA, but I think it's just good and worth remembering as we close that what we're really trying to do is carve out a space for freedom for individuals one at a time. So I thank you for that. Do I have slides? Oh, I do. Okay, so just very quickly through slides. Next slide. Just briefly, you know, we're at HXA, we're really interested in turning the organization to thinking about action, to thinking about things that we can do, all of us together as an organization, as an academy, to make our universities better. Not simply by being in closed rooms where we talk about the ideal university. That's important to do that. But now, ever more at HXA, thinking how can we do actionable things to be good partners to our university, to actually make them better. And the panel yesterday with the presidents, I thought that was an extremely interesting window into that. There we saw what it would look like for presidents to do the right things. We saw some of the struggles they undergo as they do the right things. That they mostly did the right thing, it seems to me so far. We also saw some of the ambiguities, the uncertainties that they have themselves about what the right thing really is. What's the correct divestment policy? What's the correct form of neutrality for a religious college, for example? These are questions that are still open. And HXA is working on these questions, and we need you now more than ever. Next slide, a reminder. We're looking for people to help us develop an investment neutrality doctrine. If you're interested in that, please sign on. We need you. We're looking for you. Join us, please. Next slide, please. We want you. We're interested in finding delivery mechanisms. So it's not just now that we move from having general ideas toward having models and plans. We also want to think about how we deliver those plans in functionally precise ways. So one of the methods we're interested in now exploring at HXA is committees. So we want to know from you about committees that are happening in your colleges, committees you've heard about. I was in one of the panels this morning, and someone talked about the importance of boards of regents. We're probably going to make a committee on that too, to figure out which boards of regents could we reach with our models. So we're inviting you again to join us in this more functionally precise method of trying to change our universities. Okay, last things. We've been playing a game, apparently. At least some people have been playing a game with their apps to get various points. I want to announce the winner of the game prize thing, and apparently the winner is going to get free registration for the next conference. The winner is, and I won't do a drum roll because I don't have a drum anymore. Well, I could, but Brian Gentry, are you here? Can you just stand up? Masterful. What a masterful player of the game. I don't even know what the game was. But anyway, so Brian Gentry is going to be going to the HXA conference next year. He doesn't know where he's going, though. Hey! my team. So the HXA next year's HXA conference will be in Brooklyn. We're really excited about it. We're just starting our early planning already. The team thought they're going to have some time off, but in fact, they're working on next year's conference already today. I'll just close with that. We'll see you in Brooklyn next year. Thank you for coming. Safe travels. Keep thinking differently.